Okay, Educator Effectiveness Committee is called to order. May I please have a roll call?
Dr. Beebe? Here. Dr. Beebe is present. Ms. Bofi? Ms. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford? Ms. Bradford's not in attendance. Mr. Garvey? Here. Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio?
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill? Present. Ms. Hill is present. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is not in attendance. Dr. Moranti? Present. Dr. Moranti is present. Mr. Romer? Here. Mr. Romer is present. Ms. Smith? Here. Ms. Smith is present. Ms. McKinney? She's here. She's present. Ms. Orange Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange Jones is present. You have a quorum.
Wonderful. First item.
On page 1, consideration of a proposal for studying the Compass value-added model. The recommendation is to approve.
Okay. Is there a motion? Okay. Motion by Mr. Garvey. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Bofi. Is there any discussion on this item from board members? Dr. Beebe.
Yes, I do. I want to say, well, first of all, thank you to Mr. Romer, but when I brought forth the concerns, I want to say it was October, I had envisioned exactly what I proposed, and this is a deviation from the initial proposal, which was to afford a committee who have already voiced concerns, those statisticians and mathematicians, they're local. And here with this proposal, we're authorizing Superintendent White and of course, Ms. Heather Cope to secure a third-party researcher. And once again, as a BESE member, I take my responsibilities very seriously, and certainly with my profession, the fact that this value-added model affects many educators, I have some strong reservations that we are abdicating responsibility of BESE to Superintendent White and Heather, and I know that they're here to I guess support the wishes of the board, but I think what we need to do is take a closer examination of the real issue, and the real issue is that, for me, is that in this process you're proposing, is that you have to engage the stakeholders who are most impacted by the consequences. And I feel that we need to have a trust in place, and to say that, okay, we're going to do the research. Well, you know, those of you who use Google, you could Google and you can find numerous research articles and papers regarding value-added models. So that is not my concern. My concern is with the communication that I have received by educators I represent. The value-added model, they have serious concerns. First and foremost, a third of Louisiana teachers adhere to this value-added model, or they did. And so where is the fairness in this value-added model if the intent is to maintain that one-third population? But again, going back to the trust factor, you need to have those within, because I'm going to tell you right now, if Superintendent White secures an educational researcher and we pay for that research or his findings, well, I'm going to raise questions from the beginning, because he's going to be paid, and I'm going to say, well, now Superintendent White and Ms. Cope selected the researcher, so do you think I'm going to believe the results presented? So I have a real concern there, and I'm sure many other educators also share the concern. And we do have individuals who I'm sure would step up to the plate to volunteer their time. I don't know this, I haven't spoken to them, but I'm sure they're very much interested in finding out or they're very much interested in addressing the concerns that they have, as well as other educators within the state. And so I think the intent of the proposal is good, but on the other hand, I don't know that it's going to have the results that we're hoping to achieve. And again, once, talking about paying an external researcher, I think that it's a waste of dollars when we already know what the research says regarding the value-added model. What I had envisioned was, and I need to pose this question, George Noel, was the Louisiana approved value-added model, was it approved? Is George Noel the architect, or did he secure the model, and did he analyze it or what have you, and then recommend it to the department? Because it's my understanding he built the formula, and so if that's the case, I would want to have the discussion with him as to what, where the validity is with regard to value added. And Dr. Noel is no longer on the scene, which once again creates a great concern for me because of the trust factor. If he's no longer in the picture, if he is indeed the architect, well then this is a problem. Why is he no longer here?
Mr. Romer? Oh, excuse me.
Okay, and so I just feel that if we're going to do this and we're going to invest our time and we really want to know the concerns of educators, get those statisticians and mathematicians from our university. I named 4. It doesn't necessarily have to be those 4, but I think we need to have a group that we can feel comfortable with their findings. And again, you have to have that trust before anyone's going to accept the results.
I appreciate your comments. I certainly don't dismiss them. I'll make a couple of things that I think are good steps here. Doesn't mean they're final steps, but the idea of including the Accountability Commission as kind of the housing for the debate and the discussion gives us outside, and it's a public meeting, which it should be a public meeting and held that way, gives us a chance for that body who's done fairly good work in the past and most familiar with these issues of any outside source. They will make a report to us, is what I anticipate happening, that we can either question, accept, not accept, but it's very much like we did on the MFP task force. We would house this conversation within that framework that currently exists, that we've worked with before in the past. Now, the idea of who the researcher should be, I'll be honest, I have some pause on the difficulty of finding a researcher who's already given a broad statement of opinion regarding value added. And you can find researchers on both sides who've already made statements of, I believe X and I believe Y. I would like us to try to find someone who's yet to actually give opinion on that and look at our use of the value-added model and how we use it in our state. And that's what I think these 3 bullet points are pointing to, is the way we're using it now the proper way. Is it effective? Is it fair? Is there a better way to do it? And finally, as far as Dr. Noel is concerned, I actually believe asking the architect is kind of like asking a parent to critique their own child. It's difficult to do. And so I think there's actually some validity to getting an outside resource to come in and make comment. That doesn't mean Dr. Noel shouldn't be included. It doesn't mean his comments shouldn't be considered. It doesn't mean that, the Accountability Commission may in fact ask him to respond to whatever suggestions the third party makes. So, that doesn't probably answer all your questions. I don't think we're abdicating authority to anybody. We're making sure our executive director is on point leading this. I wanted it to be with the superintendent, so that the superintendent is actually making sure questions that he wants answered, in addition to our own questions, are addressed. I think it's a value of him every year, perhaps, to review the use of the instrument and can he do it in a better way. So I want him to have input, but he doesn't have veto power. And so, I think it's I appreciate you pushing up the timeline. We had originally thought we'd bring this in February or March, and I appreciate Ms. Cope and Superintendent. I think they've given us an outline here that's, I think, effective. Now, as we go through the process, if we find out the questions that aren't being addressed that you want it to be addressed, then we can handle that at that time. But, I'm hopeful that, in fact, this structure will lead to meaningful input from the researcher and from the Accountability Commission.
Ms. Bofi.
I just wanted to let you know, Ms. Beebe, that I've had questions for Dr. Knoll before, and I've just called him about it. So I understand, that he doesn't work for the department anymore, but I also know that he was here for a while and has made contributions that affect the work that we're doing now. And so by saying that he's out of the picture, I think that, it doesn't mean that he's not accessible to us if we have questions about why something works a certain way or why certain decisions were made. And I think that while there's a number of people who are on the board when he was doing the work for the department, and they have that historical knowledge or institutional knowledge, that we also, and I would be happy to help connect you if that's something that you'd be interested in.
Dr. Beebe.
But it goes beyond me, Ms. Bofi. It's, educators, those who are directly impacted by VAM, and then not having the conversations with, I had a teacher who filed a grievance. I sat with her, and it was a telephone conference, called the department, and the questions were not answered to the teacher's satisfaction nor to my satisfaction. So I think we need to have a greater understanding of the formula, and how it's applied, and these individuals, the mathematicians, statisticians who have appeared before BESE, they have spoken, they have addressed their concerns, but yet those concerns, they may have been heard, but they have not been addressed to the extent that these people feel that we could move forward with VAM. Like I said, the trust factor is missing, and until you build that in, until that trust is in place, I don't care what researcher says what, there's not going to be buy-in. And I think and you have local people who are willing to say, I don't think they're going to be biased in any way. They just want to know, they want to have the data so that they can get into, and then perhaps these individuals, the local, when I say local, I mean Louisiana based, and if it's somebody outside of Louisiana, allow the researcher who is going to provide the information to us, let them get together to see if there's going to be a consensus reached. But just to have one individual who is going to be, I would assume, selected by superintendent or Ms. Cope, right? I can tell you, I'm not going to be satisfied with the results until I see more objectivity, more in the way of those who have already raised questions, that they would have, and they have the knowledge and expertise to ask the right questions. So I think it should be, I don't mind the recommendation for the Accountability Committee, but there was an ACE committee at some point in time. I think there was one member of the personnel directors. There was one member representing personnel directors. And I do recall going to the conference center when personnel directors were eventually invited in, and we were told that we could not speak, and it was just, in essence, it was a waste of our time. But we do have those teachers, and again, 1/3 of our teachers who are subjected to the VAM model, and that in itself, I think as we move forward with VAM, and I know it's suspended at this point, but as we move forward, there will be litigation, because I would dare say, and I was in a room with some superintendents, can we explain to our teachers the results? We can say what was presented to us, but I don't know if why this student who regressed and the other student didn't. When you go into it and you do a real clear or a fine review of the results, then you can't give an educated response. I think it's a real problem. So I understand the intent, but I think we're falling short if we just select an external researcher. I think we need to involve some of those who have the expertise to be a part of the conversation.
Ms. Bovee and then Mr. Romer.
So I think there's a couple of things that you're asking for, and one in particular that I would like to hone in on is the getting to the point to where educators understand the formula. Like, that's something that I'm hearing that you're asking for. What I understand that you have asked the board to do to achieve that, I don't believe would make that happen, right? Like, if there was a group, if we set up a task force to have meetings and they discuss the formula, I don't think that would achieve the objective you have for educators to understand the formula. So I would, I share that desire with you for our educators to understand the formula, because there's certain things in the formula that I know people don't know and understand, because I know they would feel better about it if they did know and understand it. So I would like to explore with you, and maybe the rest of the board can help us think about that, how we could get to a place where our educators do understand the formula. Because I hear that. I know you're asking for a lot of things. You're talking about several different things, but that one in particular is something that I share with you and would be interested in talking to the board or the department about how we get to that point. It's something that I would like to see happen as well.
Mr. Romer.
I appreciate everybody's comments. I actually think the structure here lends itself to a lot of input from a lot of different stakeholders. The Accountability Commission should be run that way. If there's, just like in the task force, when they ask certain people to come and give testimony that weren't necessarily members of the task force, I would expect the same with the Accountability Commission. I agree with you that we need to have input from others. There's kind of a separate issue, which is, can teachers understand the formula? I think that's a separate issue than how are we using the formula, and is the way we're using it valid? I think that's kind of what we're looking at now, is how might we use it better? And I think we would expect this third party to give us commentary in that regard. It doesn't mean this is the end of how we look at Compass or value added, but this is certainly a solid foundation, in my opinion, for an early evaluation of how we use it and how we plan on using it. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean we're not going to get this information and decide to take another step. But at this moment, I can't think of a structure that maintains input. I actually like it being one step removed from BESE, so that they can have a very thorough discussion outside the confines of our body and yet bring those results to us to consider, just like the MFP task force did. And if you find what they bring to be inadequate, I would certainly expect you, and I know you would, to express that, and we would consider that at that time. But we do have a delay period here. There seemed to be a sense of urgency at the last meeting, and I think this gets us started. It doesn't mean we're finished with what we're going to end up doing. So,
well, may I just,
Dr. Beebe.
Yeah, I would just follow up. So those individuals, and I don't know how many would be willing to come forward, but the teacher I referenced, she has a binder, and she asks good questions. So I would hope that the committee would afford those individuals an opportunity, those who received an ineffective rating, if they so desire, to go and speak directly to their concerns, so that they can have a clearer understanding. And as it relates to the Accountability Committee, I think that committee has to have the knowledge of statistics and to know all of that, because it's very deep and complex, and so I think we need to have that venue for them if they feel compelled to share their story, so that those who are reviewing the concerns would be in a better position to address the concerns.
Sure.
Great. We have two public comment cards. Lee Barrios.
Lee Barrios, St. Tammany. First of all, I'm going to preface my testimony with my usual statement that is so important, that the use of it's the high-stakes testing, the high-stakes aspect of the testing that presents a problem when using VAM. And I know that I could not sit here and explain to anybody the value-added metric that's used in the COMPASS system. I know that. I doubt any of you could either, if you're not mathematicians or statisticians. But I think there's a misunderstanding about what we're talking about here. And I see Dr. Burns is here, so if I misstate, hopefully she'll correct me or try to explain this. The value-added metric was not created by Dr. Noel. Okay, it's a well-established process, of an analytical process. What he did was create a metric wherein he used value added. And the problem with that is when it goes along with the high stakes test, and I sent you all a number of links the other day from reputable research organizations that discount the use of the value added with high stakes standardized testing. So, secondly, my comment is that this is something that should be peer reviewed. It's research. It's highly complicated mathematically. It's not a matter of paying someone to analyze it. Any research, the gold standard is peer review. And as far as I know, Dr. Noel's research has not been peer reviewed. Research also requires the testing of a hypothesis. And the pilot program, my understanding was that it never was completed and that we haven't gone through the process of testing this in order to put it into place. My final problem and most important problem with this is appointing the superintendent and the executive director of BESE to make the choice as to who should to carry out this analysis. And also, I believe it states there that they would supervise that process or that analysis. So I ask that you go ahead and and you can get, for instance, the National Education Policy Center out of the University of Colorado for free. This is what they do. And there are a number of organizations that do that for free. It should not be paid for. There's an element of bias there. So I ask you to, before you vote on this, and I think that you do need to get this done. I think you're kicking the can down the road, Mr. Romer. The legislative session is coming up. This is something that should have been settled to provide to our legislators in advance, because they're planning on entering some bills. So I ask that you adjust this before you vote on it, but that you do get this thing done. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. James Finney.
Thank you. Mr. Romer, let me talk about
Please just
bias.
say your name. Just say your
I'm
whole
sorry,
name.
it's Dr. James Finney. Mr. Romer, let me talk about bias for a moment. A specialist in this field who hasn't stated views on this topic one way or the other probably isn't really a specialist in this field. And I certainly don't pretend to be an expert on whether it's fair to judge a teacher based on a comparison of two tests, but I can tell you that whether or not the subsequent math is valid or not, if it's sufficiently transparent. The Department of Education has never properly described the calculation details, and I've been picking at them as hard as I can for 8 months to provide the details. It hasn't happened yet. Punting the proposal to the Accountability Commission at this point, 3 months after it was brought up, looks everything like a stall tactic. Nothing against the Accountability Commission, but where was that idea 3 months ago? This proposal would maintain the tradition established by Superintendent White of sharing data with friendly parties and withholding it from everyone else. We've seen an example with voucher accountability and probably several other issues. It's clear, Mr. White, that you have zero confidence in the VAM methodology, and you're afraid to admit it. This proposal would provide absolutely no real accountability. Share the raw data in all its gory details. I dare you. Mr. White, what are you afraid of? Thank you.
Thank you. We have one more public comment. Dr. Jean Burns, Board of Regents.
Jean Burns, Associate Commissioner for Teacher and Leadership Initiatives for the Louisiana Board of Regents, and I'm speaking in support of the motion that is on the floor. In previous meetings, I have not come forward when there have been discussions pertaining to value added because of the fact that I have been very intimately involved with the development of the value added model for teacher preparation. And discussions that have been occurring pertaining to the value-added model that's currently being used for teacher evaluation. However, I feel that I need to step forward in defense of the value-added model. The value-added model that was developed by George Knoll for teacher preparation was piloted. It was for 3 years before the Board of Regents made a decision to actually use the model to assess the teacher preparation programs within our state and to report results to the public. Dr. Knoll, when he developed the model, looked at other models that were being used nationally, not just within our state, but surrounding states for our state, but what was occurring in other states. He brought in many national experts. We actually had a grant from the Carnegie Foundation in order for us to study the model. But we had many national experts from across our country examine that model, give input into the model. Adjustments were made to the model as a result of the experts that we had. So that model underwent extensive review from outstanding experts across our state when the model was being developed. In addition to that, at the point that we did make the results available to the public, we actually went through a process of submitting articles to two journals at 2 different points in time that underwent a review by peers, where they looked at the model itself, they looked at what we were doing with the use of the value-added model for our teacher preparation programs within the state. So I have to stand here and tell you that I have a great deal of faith in the model that Dr. Knoll has developed, simply because I know how extensive the review occurred to get us to the point that we actually made results available to the public. Now, at the point at which Dr. Knoll started working with the Department of Education, he had learned from the implementation of the model that we used with teacher prep, ways in which the model could be improved for the Department of Education to use it for all teachers within the state. So he ended up making some adjustments to the model, improving upon the model, and that's why higher education made the decision to adopt the new model that was being implemented by the Department of Education. So again, I just could not sit here with it appearing that extensive work by national experts had not occurred before this model went to the point of being adopted by the Department of Education. What you're doing to take this to a point where someone externally looks at it, I think George Knoll himself would be in support of that, because it does not hurt to have someone external look at it. I think the fact that you are attempting to find someone who has not already developed an opinion pertaining to value-added assessment is very good. I'm on the Accountability Commission, and I think the idea that you're taking it to the Accountability Commission for public discussion is an excellent idea. So I just want to say that I'm in support of what you're doing, and I think you're moving in the right direction.
Thank you very much. Ms. Smith and then Mr. Romer.
Yes, just a couple of questions for anyone that can go back and remind me, since I'm a new member. How was the Accountability Commission developed, and what's the makeup of it, and just a little background on that, please?
Ms. Culp can give you more detail, but the makeup of that committee was determined by this board. And there was a slate of of candidates brought from a variety of different backgrounds that we chose from. And then this board voted for that slate. But Ms. Cope, if you want to be more precise.
Originally, Ms. Smith, the Accountability Commission was formed as part of our waiver from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So the department needed sort of an advisory group, and looking at some of the other advisory groups the board had, we as staff with board members got together and decided to kind of consolidate and move them together to make them a bit more useful to the board and to the department. So now we have an Accountability Commission that includes representatives from a variety of stakeholders that helps advise the department on issues not only related to... I'm sorry.
Slow down just a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, from a variety of, okay, just give me some examples.
The various teacher organizations are represented, charter schools are represented, the superintendents are represented, the School Boards Association, higher education is represented through Dr. Burns. Who am I forgetting? Community organizations are on there. Oh, that's right. Thank you, Ms. Devlin. 50% of the members of the Accountability Commission are practitioners, so that means they must be in a school setting, so they're either teachers currently or principals.
So they're actively teaching right now, 50% are actively involved in classroom?
Actively in the school system, so either as a teacher, as a principal, as a curriculum director, something like that. So they have to be current practitioners.
Okay, and so they were selected by
the
this board?
Yeah, the members
In
were able
what
to
year?
nominate people, and then the board selected from those nominations for each position.
Okay. They were interviewed, though, by department?
They were interviewed by the members who nominated them.
We asked for nominations from certain
Yeah.
groups.
So, and where I'm going with this is the Accountability Commission is made up of groups of people that may not necessarily all have the same views.
That's correct.
Well, that's what I need some explanation on, just as a new member.
And we can definitely email you the list since you weren't on the board at the time. We can get that for you. And now the Accountability Commission advises the board, the department, and then the board on a number of issues, not just those related to our waiver for BSEA. So that's why we're looking to bring this proposal to them, because they advise the department on most things related to accountability, which includes our educator evaluation system.
And I think that as I know as Superintendent White and others travel the state, this was the biggest concern they probably heard from educators, was just the whole process of VAM and how we can, what are we going to do about it. And so I am very concerned that we make the right decisions, but I just couldn't remember if this Accountability Commission was a short-term thing, or is it if you're appointed for life until whatever happens after that, or we get a new board and new superintendent, whatever?
I think it's at the purview of you all. We didn't set terms.
Ms. Devlin, just state your name for the record.
Bridget Devlin, Department of Education. The members of the Accountability Commission are serving at the length determined by their appointing authority. So some were appointed by the superintendent, some were appointed by board members, and if the board members of the superintendent decided to remove someone from the commission, they would then appoint someone in their place.
Okay, so then in the scope and sequence of this, before we vote on it, in the scope and sequence of this, so what happens after the Accountability Commission comes forward after they go, before we go to the third-party researcher, what happens in between then? Can you just kind of explain that to me?
So in this proposal, we're asking, in sort of conversations we thought about looking at the evaluation system, not on its own, but actually as part of the larger accountability system that you all use to hold schools, districts, educators accountable for the progress and expectations that you have. So we wanted to bring it into the Accountability Commission so that way we weren't just looking at the evaluation system in a silo on its own, but it actually plays into the larger accountability system that we use for schools and districts. So in this proposal, we wanted you all to not only sign off on sort of objectives for the accountability system to have, or the Accountability Commission, I'm sorry, to have when they look at the various accountability systems, but then also have those objectives be the criteria that we ask a researcher or whomever to look at when they're looking at value added specifically, and how it plays into our accountability system writ large. So that would kind of be occurring in tandem. We would probably bring that directive to the Accountability Commission and say, this is a direction we want you all to go, and in the meantime, we're going to have somebody look at value added in our accountability systems using these objectives to bring back to the Accountability Commission. And then at which time after that, we would bring it to the board depending on what happened there.
Do you have, and I see the last thing here is establish a timeline for the study, keeping in mind that shorter timelines will have higher cost. So what are we doing with regard to, have you thought about what we're going to be doing with regard to if legislation, which it will be introduced concerning VAM, and what the timeline would be with this? Because, I mean, that's reality.
Sure. We included that based on the board's request that we do this study. I cannot begin to predict the legislature's timeline, so until...
We know when it begins and when it ends.
Sure, but until we have statute directing otherwise, I don't think that we can act based on what we think the legislature may or may not do. We have current binding statute and policy that we must follow, so I think we're operating within that parameter.
Superintendent.
If I might, I think one way to look at it is we have... and the board has kind of bought the system some time to reflect and to learn. And I think that time is, say 12 to 18 months, because we have a couple of years of this process. So the Superintendent Peugeot, myself, and our task force have charted out a timeline for our own decision-making as a superintendent leadership body with the department. That parallels a timeline for decision-making that we have had approved at the Accountability Commission. Last week, they approved a timeline. The decision-making process on long-term Compass decisions we have agreed to is March to August of this year. So my hope is, and I hope it's reflected by the Accountability Commission and the Superintendent's Task Force, that by August of this year, we will be able together to bring back to the board our recommended framework for Compass as well as for letter grades, and after we get through all this transition.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mr. Romer.
Yeah, I would just say that just as we did, I point to the success we had with the MFP Task Force, and in a somewhat limited time and a somewhat limited scope, its ability to bring to us a recommendation that had pretty broad support. Doesn't mean it had 100% support. I also would point to the fact that there were some no votes on that task force, and they too came and presented their objections. I would expect the same kind of activity in this instance, that we're going to do our best to build a consensus. Hopefully that committee will try to do that, bring that report to us, but I would suspect if someone objected or had a complaint, they too would be welcome to come and bring that forward. I don't know, and there have been, our ability to find a completely unbiased, neutral party, I don't know to what degree that can be achieved. I think that's worth trying to do, trying to find someone that's not actually on the record with our specific statutes and our specific law in mind, but is worth trying. But nonetheless, that's also the point of including the engagement of the Accountability Commission, because they're outside of our body, and they should be the ones to hold that researcher accountable at the same time for what they're doing. So, look, it's not we may find as we progress through this that we want to do more or we want to do something different. But I certainly think this board in the past 6 months has proven that it is willing to have an open public debate about issues and bring those legitimately back to us for our consideration. And I would expect this to do the same.
Ms. Bophy.
Well, another thing that I think is something of great merit to this proposal that we need to keep in mind is that by establishing the practice of issues related to value added or to the overall teacher evaluations, by bringing those to our Accountability Commission, which is an existing commission, that's a practice that we can establish, because we know that we'll continue to work on educator evaluations. And I think that's probably the misconception that people have had about educator evaluations all along, is that you would offer one type of evaluation and then that would be the evaluation for decades to come. But then as time goes on, we learn more and more about this. And so just as our accountability system for districts and schools have evolved over time, I anticipate that our evaluation for teachers will continue to evolve. And by establishing the practice of sending questions that we have to the Accountability Commission, that's a practice that continue to exist as we consider how we may evolve this system over time to make sure that we're giving our educators the feedback they need to continuously improve. So I think that's a merit to this proposal, and it's something that I want board members to consider as you're thinking about your vote on this.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor and a second. Are there any objections to this motion? Having none, the motion carries. Next item.
On page 3, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 996, standards for approval of teacher and/or educational leader preparation programs to update the state partnership with the Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation. The recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent and to authorize.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
move.
All right, we have a motion and a second by Dr. Moranti. Is there any board discussion on this particular item?
Members, this is a technical issue where you essentially two governing bodies of teacher preparation institutions across the country have merged. So this essentially is adjusting it for a new accreditation body in the higher education system. It is not a substantive thing immediately, just a name change at this point.
Thank you. Any additional conversation on this item? Okay. Any objections? Okay. Having none, the motion passes. Are there any other items? Okay. That concludes our Educator Effectiveness Committee. The next committee will begin at
Dr. Moranti, 10 minutes or 5 minutes? 10 minutes? 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Thank you.